Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first episodes of the STEMs of Grad School podcast. Today, we have Ariana DeCastro, who is a bioengineering PhD student and the founder of the Sassy Scientist. And so, just to kind of start off today, can you talk to us a little bit about kind of your background and what you're doing now and how you got to your current position?
Yes, so hi everyone. My name is Ariana. I am a first generation college student and the only one in my family to go to grad school and even study STEM. I am Filipino American and Pacific Islander. So how I got to where I am today, I have always been a kid who loved science and math and didn't really like history and writing and any of that stuff. So I continued to pursue that as an undergrad. So I got my undergrad degree in biomedical engineering. And to be honest, after my undergrad degree, I never really explored what I could do in terms of like a career as a biomedical engineer with just my undergrad. A lot of the mentorship I got was really only to go to grad school. And I didn't explore any other career paths, and that's kind of how I got here into my PhD. I definitely recommend doing that, like exploring the different career paths if you can. But I went straight from my undergrad to my PhD program now. And during my first year, I was really isolated in terms of like I didn't have my immediate friend group, my family, because I'm a first generation student, didn't necessarily understand the difficulties and like feelings I was having when I transitioned into my graduate school program. So I was like, I had a lot of different thoughts and I was like, I wanted friends basically. I wanted community. So then I started, I started the Sassy Scientist because I was like, I just kind of wanted to document all of these things that I was thinking and share them in hopes of finding other people who were kind of going through similar things as me because I was like, there's no way I'm the only one. Maybe I'm the only one like in this vicinity right now, but there's no way I'm the only one. Like I have the internet as a resource. So I used it to um, kind of find people like me. And then the longer I did it, it turned into a coaching business. So I also am now a grad school coach for first generation and women of color who are in PhD programs.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm first generation college student and PhD student.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely understand that with not having anyone around you that understands what you're going through or can tell you to do the certain things. Like you don't have to go to grad school or all the other things that you don't know and you're just listening to professors for the advice on.
Right. Yeah. And my family and even my partner, they could only see all the successes that I had, right? They couldn't
Mm-hmm.
really understand, well, like you're getting paid to go to school, like what could be so wrong and like what's like like what do you mean things aren't working in the lab? What do you mean you need to like submit a publication? Like it was just it was just
Yeah.
like a lot of different things that they had never really heard of and didn't consider hardships, which I understand. Like, I've had a lot of opportunity and privilege, but with that comes some difficult times in grad school, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I know that can be difficult as well. My partner also is not a graduate student. And so dealing with that, and even like you said, you're getting paid to go to grad school, like that's something that a lot of undergrad students who are first generational don't know that they can actually get paid to go to grad school and get a PhD, predominantly in the sciences, but even in other disciplines, you can actually get paid. And so that's something that I like regularly put out on Twitter is like, hey, FYI, you can get paid to do this.
Yeah, I actually had to explain that to one of my friends who thought I was crazy, like applying for PhD
Mm-hmm.
programs. And like now she's kind of working full time and like building her career. And she's like, did you know you get paid for grad school? And I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
I do get paid for grad school. You can get paid to do that. And she was like, I might look into this. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I think I found out my junior year of college because I was like trying to find scholarships for grad school, and then someone was like, "Why are you finding like you get paid?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's nice."
Amazing.
So, can you dive a little bit more into kind of what you do at the Sassy Scientist and what you're, because you talked about how you're coaching. So, like, what specifically are you helping students with?
Yes, so I am helping first generation and women of color who are in PhD programs show up confidently, create their work life balance, and stay focused and motivated, all with the end goal of helping them enjoy their PhD experience. Because, even when I was an undergrad, a lot of the messaging I got about grad school was that it had to be miserable. Like you kind of had to be a workhorse for 5 years for the paycheck to pay off once you
Hmm.
get that doctor degree. And when I got to grad school, that's kind of what I had in my head. So I thought this whole miserable feeling that I was feeling was just like how it is. And I really hate it when people tell me like that's just how it's supposed to be. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? So um I was kind of like, do people not realize that they can just, I mean, it took me a while to realize that, but once I realized that I can create like my dream life and live a very
Hmm.
happy, fulfilling, purposeful life while I'm still in grad school, I just really wanted to share that messaging and all of the ways that I learned that with other women who are in similar situations and backgrounds that I'm in, because I think so often I think we're taught to just like again accept what
Hmm.
we're told, accept the norms and the culture and things like that. And I didn't want to do that. So
Yeah,
I created the program to like change that messaging around grad school specifically.
yeah, that's so great. And I think it's really important because I think academia is starting to shift towards maybe it's not good to have this messaging that grad students need to be miserable, but I still think that there's a lot of guilt associated with that. And so being able to talk with someone about what they're feeling and how to create that structure and deal with the guilt that comes along with it, I think is really important probably for a lot of people. So I'm really glad that you have, you've built this coaching service and can share those messages.
Thank you.
So kind of to start off, why is it important for graduate students to have and prioritize a work life balance?
So I think it's important because in grad school, you kind of tend to associate your identity and your self-worth with what you produce and that like title, whatever it is, like scientist, engineer, doctor that you have slash are seeking. And it's very easy to only again find your self-worth in that. But if without work-life balance, it's like you need to nourish all the other sides of you, whatever they are, whether you're like working out or art or playing with your dog, something else, like, because you need to, you're a well-rounded human being with lots of different aspects that need the same amount of time and energy that you put into your research and your degree. And I think we forget that. Even I forget that. It's always like a work in progress, right? And I
Mhm.
think that's why work life balance is so important, because if you nourish all the sides of you, then that can only help you be better, right?
Mhm.
As a researcher, as a student, and just like happier overall.
Yeah, I think just kind of from my experiences, I think when you start actually prioritizing your work-life balance, you can like get re-excited because you're like forcing yourself to take time away. So you're like, "Ooh, I want to go back to work," instead of just always being there and always wanting to leave.
Yeah, that's true. Because it's like when you're there and you're working and you kind of lose sight big picture, like, why
Hmm.
am I doing this again? What's my purpose in all of this? And I think I say this all the time. I think like the longer you're in PhD programs, I feel like you get a little jaded and like, and you don't want to ever get there. You want to be able to enjoy a nice day outside or take a
Hmm.
day off because you need it to kind of recharge. And yeah, I think that's why
Yeah.
balance is important.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what are some tips do you have for creating work-life balance in grad school?
I think something that everybody should do is just like prioritize. the major areas in your life. You know, like if you're in grad school, your degree is one major area of your life that you're going to prioritize. But what else is important to you? So for me, it's my overall wellness is really important to me. And then coaching is really important to me, right? And in addition, you always have whatever personal goals that you want to work on. So prioritizing and defining those like really big areas, I think is super important to having work-life balance, because if you try to take on 500 different things, right, like you're not gonna make progress on
Yeah.
all of it. And then like once you prioritize all that, you need to actually create the time in your week, in your day, in your month, however you want to schedule, to make progress on all of those priorities. Because I also really can't stand it when people are like, oh, I just don't have the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and I think you create time for what's important to
Yeah.
you. So like once you define what's important to you, then you can figure out where can I carve out the time to do XYZ. And lastly, just like knowing what to let go of. You know, I think
Okay.
for when I first joined my PhD program, I wanted to do everything because everything was so new and so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And but then, you know, you realize that you get asked to volunteer a lot of your time to things that aren't research, like, you know, that aren't priority, which is like
Mm-hmm.
things like research, like, oh, you join a committee or you mentor someone else, and like in reality, like you're not being paid for all those extra
Yeah.
things that you're dedicating your time to. So like knowing when to say no, I'm always working on it, but I'm better at it now
Mm-hmm.
than when I first joined my PhD program. So
Yeah, and I think kind of going off like knowing when to say no. I know one thing I've recently come introduced to, I've been like trying to do a lot of like self-improvement stuff. And so one thing I've learned is like the Paretos Principle, or 80-20. So 80% of your success will come from 20% of your efforts. And so, like, applying that, like, thinking back about my grad school experience, I'm like, that was probably about accurate. Like, I spent a lot of time, at least within my overall time that I spent at school, about 20% of that time actually led to my success, where a lot of that time was like going to pointless meetings and doing things that I thought would make me, would be important and wasn't, and things like that. So learning to say, like, the more that you do that and say no to the things, recognize the things that aren't leading to success and saying no to them is really important to regain that time essentially.
yeah, like I really try to only say yes to things that will help me like move the needle forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to whatever goal that I'm trying to get to. And for a long time, I felt really guilty because it's like, oh, I should be in the lab more. But then I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, if I finish everything I need to do in the lab, why do I need to like be there more if I'm getting what I need out of it? You know, it's just kind of a weird mindset. I feel like grad students have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And then the kind of competition game between, I feel like, I don't know if this exists in your university or your lab, but like in my labs and university, there was a lot of competition of who was there latest and who's putting in the most hours, and the idea that that person's the one that really cares and stuff like that. It can be really like hard and like contributes to your guilt when you're just like, I'm being a normal person, like I work a normal job, and then trying to deal with the competitive atmosphere of grad school.
I think, but honestly, I really believe that, well, at least for me, that competition is just all in my head. Like, I really don't
Mm,
think, you know what I mean? Because, like, I will
yeah.
see, we kind of have this joke that certain labs in my department, they're always there 24/7.
Hmm.
Their grad students may already be defending like tomorrow, right? And, and I'm just like, man, I don't work as hard as those guys because they're always there. And I think, you know, and I'm like, I really don't. But then after a while, I was like, I don't think that's true. They may just like have certain timing things that require them to be there all the time. And I'm like, honestly, no one's saying this, but that scared part in my head. And I think I see it in like my friends too, because again, we're always like, oh, those people that always work and we're not
Hmm.
here. But it's a weird weird feeling for sure.
Yeah, I remember when I rotated labs in grad school, and so when I was rotating into my second lab, the people from my first lab was like, "Well, their lights are off at 5." Like that was supposed to tell me something about like something negative. Like that was they were like, "Well, I don't have, really any problems with them, but their lights are always off at 5." I'm like, I don't like, is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Like, I'm not really sure. And then I get into the lab, and that was never true for one, but mainly because we all had like different schedules because we only had one instrument. So, like, some people would come in later and work later, some people would come in earlier and work earlier. And so it's just, kind of funny. Like, I actually had that where people were actually like out loud that was happening, but I think that also happens with internally, like you said, where you're kind of like, oh, I'm not going to be as successful as this imaginary person that works late.
Yeah, I think our lights are usually out by 5
Yeah.
in my lab. So,
I'm like, it's not that that's a bad, like, if anything, that should be like a compliment. Like, they can get their work done in a normal work day. Like, good job to them.
yeah, and like, I think it all comes from like that whole flexible lifestyle that
Mm-hmm.
grad students live. Like, I always tell people, I'm like, you can start working at 1, you can start working at midnight, like whatever you feel like you need to do, it really doesn't matter whether you're here at 9 to 5. And my advisor, I think, told me that from the very beginning. She was like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going to check if you're here. Like, I don't really care if you're here certain hours. I just want to see what you produce. And if you
Mm-hmm.
keep up with what you can produce, then that's all that matters, really.
Yeah, my when I first started in my lab, my advisor had a similar. He was like, I care about your results. I don't care what time you're here. And so I like my hour, I am not a morning person. So my hours once I got out of classes were like regularly like 10 to 4 or 10 to 5.
Nice.
I mean, occasionally I'd work like the really long night to get like a lot of instrument time, but like I'm just not a morning person. And like most of my lab would be in at like 6, 7 a.m. And I was just like, nope, it's not happening.
It's funny because I'm like a 10 to 4 kind of person, and I'm usually the first one in lab, give or
Oh,
take. So,
wow.
yeah, so I feel like if you're there, and my lab mates think 10 is early. So I'm like, yeah, but 10 is like a good time for me because I
Yeah.
can like rest a little bit in the morning.
Hmm.
But that's really interesting that they're there so early.
Yeah, my lab was also got into kind of the let's work 10-hour days regularly. And it was like funny because like they would be in there at like 7 a.m. playing video games on their computer. And I'm like, why do you not want to sleep? Like
That's funny. That's how my undergrad lab was, though. I'm not gonna lie. They'd like run a long experiment and then set up Mario Kart on the giant monitors and like have a time while the experiments are running in the lab. And I'm like, this is weird, but kind of cool, but kind of weird.
it's kind of cool. I'm like, at least that makes sense because they're like they need to be there. So at least they're doing
Yeah,
something, they're having their version of work-life balance, I guess.
yeah, I
So
guess so.
that's kind of funny, yeah. So I guess can you like kind of walk through like your typical day or week and how you manage your own work-life balance, in that type of schedule?
Yes. So, my typical day starts. I try to wake up around 7 or 8 a.m. and I'm very like I need my mornings to myself. I'm like that kind of person.
Hmm.
Like I need to journal, I need my quiet time, and like I like to read my book or listen to a podcast while I sip my coffee. And like I need like not total silence, but I need a really like peaceful and calm morning because it's one of the only parts of my day that I can really have some control over, right? And after I get ready for the day, I hop on stories just to kind of show my face to my
So
clients, my
Instagram,
followers. Yeah,
Instagram
Instagram
stories.
stories.
Okay.
Yeah, and I usually do some kind of like, here's my lesson for today that all of you need to
Okay.
know. And if anyone listens to me, who listens to this and follows me, they probably know what I'm talking about. And then, like I said, then I'm in the lab around 10:30, give or take. And
Okay.
usually if I'm running an experiment, I will go to lab, which lately that's how it's been. And I will work in the lab and at my desk space usually until around 3 or 4. And that chunk of the middle of the day is mostly solely reserved just for like research and PhD stuff. And I like to end my PhD work at around 4,
Okay.
give or take. And I'll use the afternoon to work out and go home and just kind of like do my little like end of day kind of routine, you know. Again,
Yeah.
that's the other part of my day I can really control. And one of the areas I prioritize in my life, like I was saying earlier, in addition to my PhD, is my wellness. So like I take at least having some kind of like fitness and having nourishing dinner is like really important to me. So that's kind of what my evenings consist of. And if I need to work on coaching things, like maybe I have a coaching call, or maybe I don't. But if I don't, then I'll just relax, watch some reality TV, read more reading of my books, and like playing video games. That's kind of like I like to kind of end my day having some kind of fun, you know,
Yeah.
whatever it could be that day. And that's kind of usually how my Monday through Friday works. And
Okay.
yeah, and on the weekends, it's really like if I need to work, I will, but I'm really trying to get better about not doing that, or I'll spend time with my family or my partner, you know, whatever it needs to be. Have more fun on the
Yeah.
because I'm just like, I just want to have fun when I'm not in the lab. So that's kind of how my weeks go.
Okay. And then do you like ever bring work home or do you try and always keep it at school within the time that you're there?
Um, I think that phrase is funny because it's like I've been in a half work from home situation, right? Because
That's
I'm like,
fair. That's fair.
bring work home. I'm like, work is kind of always there. But if I am working from home, I will keep that same 10 to 4 hour range. Like I don't like work's always home, but I most likely won't touch work like
Okay.
after 5. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
unless it's like a deadline or like really urgent things, like working on a publication that can have a lot of urgency
Right.
around it. So then like yeah, I'll carve out time on my weekend to work on that if I need to. But my brain after 5 p.m. thinking about PhD, it's not really productive for me because I'll like look at things. I'm just like, I don't even want to do this right now. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
I know if I'm not gonna make progress on it, I'm not gonna touch it, basically.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think whenever I was in my PhD, I would have my laptop open and like be like, I'm gonna work, sitting on the couch watching TV. And I never worked. But I always like felt, but then it was like also like every like 5 minutes I'd like come back and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be working. So it was like never really relaxing, but then I was also not being productive. Um, so yeah, so what do you think like now, because like you said, you're in this kind of work from home situation, what are tips for others that are working from home, or what do you do to make sure that you are still maintaining that balance? Because you can't really just leave work at school because you're working at home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think having like set start and end times,
Okay.
that is what personally works for me. Like I said, I'm usually like a 10 to 4, that's when I'll get work done kind of person. And but like within that time, I think deciding what you're gonna do like ahead of time, like actually scheduling like, okay, 2 hours for reading, 2 hours for data analysis or whatever it is, I think is super important because then like you don't have to sit there and overthink on all the things that you have to do. You've kind of
Mm-hmm.
like designated already like this time is for XYZ. I think that really helps. And I've been personally trying to work on creating like a very like productive and nice workspace,
Yeah.
because if your workspace is not designated and kind of messy, it's like you don't even want to touch your work because you don't have anywhere to work. And then you work in the living room in front of the TV. And like you said, this is
Yeah.
nothing gets done. So the set work hours, actually scheduling and like picking out what you're going to do and like working on a workspace that works for you, if you have the means to,
Mm-hmm.
I think is all really helpful.
So kind of making a workspace in your home and then leaving work in that space.
Right, yeah, and
Okay, yeah.
something me and, like, some of my other friends did when we were, like, peak quarantine, we would jump on Zoom and, like, it would all be on mute, but I would see their face there and we'd be, like,
Yeah.
writing, you know what I mean? So, like, if you really need to find your buddy to do Zoom work with you, but,
Yeah,
like,
so
you
like
don't
little
need to
work
necessarily
sessions.
talk. Yeah, so we
Yeah.
would do that in peak quarantine.
No, that makes sense because it's like you always feel better when like there's someone there working with you. At least I did, and then but then often that would devolve into not getting work done and having conversations. So I guess the mute button is helpful for that.
Right, it's like 50-50. You might get work done, but at least you're not, like, alone,
Yeah.
right? Like, that feeling of being alone at least is kind of taken care of.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So I guess something we've kind of touched on, but I think a lot of people think that if they maintain work-life balance in grad school, they're not going to be as successful as the person who just works all the time. And so what would you kind of say to that? Do you think that having work-life balance makes you less successful? Does it matter?
I think when I saw that question too, like, beforehand when you sent it to me, I was kind of like, "That's very interesting," because I was like, I would define myself as successful on my own terms, like, I've
Yeah.
had to work on what my definition of successful is, and to me someone who is successful is someone who is able to put their time and their energy in the important parts of their life, and that's not for me, that's not only my PhD. Maybe for some people it is, and that's what they want to put all of their time and energy, and they find a lot of reward in that, but it's okay if you're not that person. And
Mhm.
it took me a while to work on that because I think again, like you said, a lot of us define successful as like the last person to leave the lab,
Mhm.
right? Or the one who's always there and working. But that to me, that's not how I define it. I kind of, if I did that, I knew I would be unhappy, and
Yeah.
that that's not what I want. And like I said, if I nourish all those other parts of me, then that's going to reflect in my work. I'm only going to produce
Mhm.
better if I'm sleeping well, I'm eating well, I'm spending time with my loved ones who have, bring me some kind of reward. You know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
it, like, uh, so I think work on what your definition of success is, and like work up to living to that, and not only what you think it should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. So basically, like finding your identity that's not just in your PhD work or your grad school work, but finding that identity and then setting goals and then success is meeting those goals, whether it's science related or, puzzle related. I don't know, I like puzzles.
No, that's honestly like that's like something that you find lots of reward
Yes.
in, right? So like that's what you need to put your time and
Yeah.
energy into. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing that kind of goes into that, and maybe that's not something that you've kind of experienced where people are like, oh, I'm not going to be as successful, if I prioritize me. But I think from my own experiences, something else that goes into it is when you're not prioritizing work-life balance, you may be spending the hours in the at work or in the lab, but it doesn't mean you're actually producing the work. Because like again, another self-improvement thing is like Parkinson's Law, which is your work will take up the space you give it. So if I in my head is like I have to work 12-hour days, then things that could take an hour may start taking 4 hours because I have to be there anyways. Yeah. And I think when I kind of shifted in my own grad school experience, my like first year I worked crazy like hours because I was like, I want to be successful. And that was my thought. And then I looked at it and I realized I spent so much time looking at a blank computer. I spent so much time on Facebook or YouTube or watching TV shows, going to get coffee. And like those things like can be helpful. Like I still love going and getting coffee with like, my friends and other grad students, but a 2-hour coffee break when you're saying it's work, it's not really work. You're just like delaying that. So learning to prioritize work within your scheduled time.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of like it comes down to efficiency. And I'm someone who like I need to maximize my efficiency like no matter what I'm doing.
Yes.
So like I can get a lot done in say like a 4-hour afternoon period of working versus if I was there like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., I'd probably be half asleep. I'd probably take a little mini nap at my desk and I'd stop to get lunch. So like, you know what I mean? But like, if I'm there and I know I want to be out by 4 p.m. because I
Mm-hmm.
want to go to the gym or whatever, like I will maximize that time. And like, I already know what I'm going to do. I put away my phone. I put everything on do not disturb. And I just
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm like zoned in and focused, which goes a long way,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of again putting all those hours in the lab, but maybe you don't have to.
Right, right. And I think that's important, learning to recognize that. And like something is like, if you look at your last week, what did you do that actually brought you success in your goals? And how much time was that really? Was it only 4 hours in your last 60 hours of working that you actually did something, productive? And looking at that and then reanalyzing what are the things. So like you said, putting your phone on do not disturb. I think that's something, and even like emails. So that's something I've switched to, is having like a specified time for my emails and then taking off those notifications off my phone. So it's not like every 30 minutes I'm spending 15 minutes on an email.
Yeah, or like you're like refreshing to see if your advisor
Yes.
replied to you.
Yes. I do that way too much.
But yeah, I had to close the email tab because I'm like, honestly, we'll check it when, let's say, like after 45 minutes of working, then you have those 15 minutes to go check your emails real quick.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the case, I mean, there are cases where you've decided that like you want to have work life balance, and we convinced you that you need to have work life balance, but you don't know how your supervisor's going to take it, or maybe they're asking you to work long hours. How are there suggestions or tips you have for dealing with those kinds of situations?
Well, I'm just going to preface that by saying I have a very supportive and I've only had a very positive relationship with my advisor. So this is all just from what I think. And I obviously don't know what you're going through, whoever's
Right.
like listening to this. But I think if you can, having like an expectations meeting with your advisor, which I was told to do right when I started grad
Mm-hmm.
school, and just kind of like coming to a mutual understanding of like this is what you expect me to produce and this is what I'll produce. And yeah, like come like getting to be on the same page. And if you can, my university actually encourages us to kind of come up with like a contract or like some kind
Okay.
of document with like this is what's expected of me, this is what's expected of you, and like both people sign, or both people put their name
Right.
down, like this is what this is what's going to happen basically in my PhD. And like revisiting that every single year, at least once a year, is what my
Okay.
university recommends. So like if you're able to have that um conversation with your advisor, I think you should. It's important. Like I said, I had that conversation at the very very beginning of my PhD, so I knew what to expect. I never felt like things were taking me by surprise,
Right.
kind of. But if you're not, the honestly, I don't really believe that advisors can control what you do when you're not in the lab. like honestly, when you get home, like they're not there. They're not going to know what you spend your time on like when you leave. And like even I think in this new environment, I don't know if you know anything about this, but like I feel like advisors are even less there in
Mhm.
person, like in the buildings, in the labs, like than they were before.
Right.
So if anything, I feel like they're they're not keeping track of you. You know what I mean? And like you can
Yeah.
kind of, I think you should kind of take ownership. Like you're running your PhD project and it's kind of like on your terms of whether or not you want to work on it. And if you want to, that's awesome. Like when like if say after 8 p.m. you still want to do stuff, that's awesome. But if you don't, I honestly don't believe that they will know. You know what I mean? So
Right.
it's kind of up to you to kind of be like, okay, well, I'm choosing this and like owning that choice.
Yeah.
It's not like a parent checking in on you or anything. At least I
That's
would
fair.
hope so. At least I would hope it's not like that. So I kind of think you have to just make your choice to leave it at that and own it.
Yeah, I think I also had kind of an expectations of, like talk with my advisor. I was just like, what do you expect? Like just in a just randomly. And the answer I got was results every week. So you should have done something the last week that you can tell me the next week. And when I started off, I thought that meant like a paper every week, like the amount of data for a paper every week, which was insane.
Yeah,
And
no.
so like it probably would have been better to be like I thought if my experiment failed on Thursday, I had to redo it so that I had results the next week, you know. Um, but I think you're right. Like just having a conversation and being like, what do you expect? And then just like you would in any normal job, right? You're expected to meet certain milestones and you have to figure out how to do that within the time you're going to work. And so I think having that conversation, I think most advisors, I would say, if you were like, what do you expect, and you can deliver that, they probably don't care as much about the time you're taking to deliver that, or at least pique their scientific curiosity. Let's be like, let's do an experiment. If I can do this, can we like forget about the time thing?
That's a nice thing. I never thought of that. But yeah, I mean, I think even it on the parts that I don't have on the days like I don't have data, my advisor is still really supportive. And in a way, I would hope that you can remember that your advisors were grad students once too. And
Hmm.
I hope that they can remember that and just because sometimes they forget, but
Yeah.
I hope that they can remember what it was like to be a grad student and just like treat people as humanely as possible. And I know some advisors don't do that, but there are a lot that do. So just kind of seeing your advisor as human kind of
Hmm.
lets them see you as one too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of kind of pressure can often stem from just not communicating. So you assume that your advisor thinks one thing, and then you feel the pressure of that when your advisor never actually thought that. Um, and I think a lot of us can be like intimidated by our advisors, and so we don't want to let them down, but we also don't want to tell them we don't know what we're doing in certain things.
Yes, and I teach this to my clients too. I do this for myself. It's like, did I say that? Did my advisor say that, or am I just saying that in my head?
Yeah,
Because I think maybe you think in your head your advisor expects you to work ridiculous hours, but
hmm,
did they ever actually say that to you in person, or do you just think that's what they expect? Because like it's like you shouldn't assume it, right? It might not be
right.
true. Like so unless it comes from their mouth, like don't necessarily believe that they think all these terrible things about you, which I think is where we all tend to spiral, right? Like, oh,
Yeah,
my advisor is going to fire me next week, and I'm like, it's just like, no, they're not.
yeah. I think that's definitely something when I started and I was working crazy hours. I was constantly like, okay, what do I need to do next? Like my advisor's going to be upset if I don't get this data done. And there was at one point my advisor was basically like, please stop doing research. Like you're stressing me out and I don't like it. And so it was like learning that like I took what my advisor said to mean something that he never meant. And I was actually causing him more stress because I was stressing myself out. And then just learning, to come to this balance of it's okay for me to take time for me. And if your advisor really has an issue with it, they'll let you know. But that generally only happens when your results are like, you haven't done anything in 2 months, or something like
Right,
that
like
with no explanation. If you're like, well, I've been in here running these experiments, but they're failing, then that's, obviously you've been doing stuff. But I think that's only when that really comes into play, because I think a lot of advisors are way too busy to actually keep track of what you're doing.
yeah, I really don't think our advisors think of us as much as we think of them.
That's probably
Like
very true.
they're busy, they have kids, they have
Mm-hmm.
spouses, they're just like 10 times more busy, and they're teaching, so it's like, just do
Yeah.
your thing, they're not worried about you.
It's like research is only like 30% of most places. Research is about 30% of their like duties. And that's a lot of like reviewing papers and writing grants. And we're like, he's mad at me or she's mad at, like, we're thinking that like they're upset at us, and they're probably like, I didn't even think about you today.
They just didn't have a chance to read your email yet. Like,
Yeah. Yep. And then like also reading into emails, right? Like, yeah, oh, there's that sounded like a sassy email. And it's like that, they wrote it in like 2 seconds. They were like, here's the information, go away.
right, like they had that in that 15-minute window, that's all they could have given you in that
Yep.
email. So like, don't take it personally.
Yeah. Um, and then I guess one of the last questions is, I think a lot of people feel very guilty when they don't work, and they're like, again, like we've been saying, not only just, even if they can recognize that success isn't tied to it and everything, some people can still feel guilty about it. So do you have, how do you deal, or did you deal with guilt about not working, and how did you deal with it, and what tips do you have for other people?
Yeah, I think something I had to learn was that my worth as like a human being, not even as a grad student, is not going to only be found in what I produce every week, because I think we're taught that you're only successful, right, if you have something to show for it at the
Mm-hmm.
end. But I really had to learn, like, it's okay, maybe that didn't work, things aren't always in your control. And if like, but like also on top of that, if you really want to quantify it, as a grad student, like, you don't get paid. But you just don't get paid to work all these ridiculous extra amount of hours. Like, you only get paid to work these like minimum amount of hours. And it's like, honestly, if you're not being paid for it, like, what do you get out of it? Because it's not like you get bonus points on your thesis. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like that. I mean, unless it's really needle moving work, right? Like I said, if it's a needle moving task and like you need to put your energy and time in that, that's fine. But if it's like all this extra stuff of like, you just feel like you need to produce, or you just feel like you need
Mm-hmm.
to be working, I think you need to question, like, well, why do I feel that way about myself? And am I being paid for this work?
Yeah.
um and I think those are the two things that I would say to that, to stop feeling guilty. And again, like, it's your choice. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're an adult, you're a leader. Like, you really just need to step into it and own it.
Yeah, I think those are really good tips. And kind of, yeah, owning what you're going to do, and realizing that you're more than your PhD, um, which I think is something that's really important. And I think another thing is like realizing that everything you do, even if it like could be publishable, probably isn't getting published. Like in my case, I have 5 papers sitting on my advisor's desk that's probably never going to be published. And so, just recognizing that some things in your life are more important than whatever is going on in your science life.
Right. Yeah. Like, what's it going to take for you to feel fulfilled and
Mm-hmm.
happy and like you have a purpose? And if that's your PhD, like, that's awesome. But like, that's awesome. Okay, too, if you're not that person. Because I know a lot of people who are on both sides of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, coming up with your own definition of success and
Mm-hmm.
working towards that, then you should feel satisfied with the life you're living.
Yeah, I like recently saw a tweet that basically said, what are the things you're gonna do once you stop your PhD? Like once you finish your PhD. And they were like listing all these things, and I like replied to it and I was like, why don't you just do those things now? Because like that's we think let's put our life on hold to get our degree, and then from being on the other side of that and like a year out of my PhD, I it's not worth it. It's not worth it to put your life on hold. It's life is just as hard after your PhD. If you don't, it's your choice now. You can make this choice now. It's not like once you get your PhD, everyone's like, oh, you get work-life balance now. Like they're going to keep demanding the same things from you. You know, like you said, it's your choice you have to make to prioritize yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, me included, were always like, once I get this done, then I
Mm-hmm.
can start doing this, but I think like I said, learning that grad school didn't have to be miserable, that I could live my dream life. Like maybe I can't travel the world right now because I have to commit to my research, but I could take like weekend road trips. I could
Mm-hmm.
sightsee what's nearby. I can adopt a dog. You know what I mean? Because that will bring me joy, right? Like I don't need to wait until I'm Dr. DeCastro to be happy and be fulfilled. Like I can do that now.
Yeah.
It's okay. Like it's not going to define me, you know?
Yeah, I think I took the most trips in graduate school. And I did like up to that and since there. I like went to Chicago, went to Seattle, went to Florida, like not even including conference trips. That was just like my fun trips.
Right. Again, flexible lifestyle. You can do what you want.
Right, right. Yeah, because it's like if you get your work done, you know, especially I know some people who will like um get a bunch of like work done in the lab and have all this data and then be like, yeah, I'm gonna go home for 3 weeks and work up data. And as long as you don't have like classes or something, well, I guess in this era, classes might even be online and you can do that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I can't wait until we can go again and go to in-person conferences and just like go
Yes.
places. I'm so
Have the
excited.
really bad coffee again.
Oh, yeah. It's weird when you miss 9 a.m. seminar and like the people didn't make the coffee right. And it's really weird to miss that like during a time
Yeah.
because I found myself missing that because I'm like, I didn't realize how much camaraderie happened during that hour. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I
like
miss those things.
when you're like miss complaining about the bad coffee, and then the person next to you is like, yeah, it really just doesn't really taste right. And then you start
Right.
talking.
Yeah. And then the person who made the coffee like defends whatever they did. Um
Yeah,
I miss that.
yeah. I've never actually been in the room with the person who makes the coffee, luckily.
I've made the comment too loud before. So
I
I've been that person.
think that's fine. I can't make coffee, so I'm not gonna judge other people. So kind of as a last thing, what are some resources that you know of or have created yourself to deal with this? And then where can people find you and you know get to know you more and stuff like that?
Well, I'm gonna plug my coaching program just because I
Yeah.
believe in it. So I have a one-on-one coaching program, and like I said, it's for first-generation women of color who want to build their confidence, create their work-life balance, and just stay focused and motivated so they can enjoy their PhD experience. And if you're interested in that, you can just send me a message on Instagram, which will maybe hopefully be linked
Yeah, I'm gonna
somewhere
I'm
down
gonna
here.
link your
Somewhere
Instagram. Yep.
somewhere down there. And I think there are a lot of resources in general online, but finding somewhere where you can find a community, whether it's like through a podcast, through an Instagram page. I think something that really helped me early on was her STEM story, and it's run
Is
by
that
Prasha. And I actually have done her coaching program as well, and she's great specifically for like women in STEM. But I think on top of that, with all the resources that you see on social media, I think you just really need to figure out what's going to work for you. Like try a lot of different things if you want to, but or don't just do something and stick by it just because you see someone like you admire doing it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, I've fallen in the trap of like, oh, they get up at 5 a.m. I need to get up at 5 a.m. But it's like,
Yeah.
but it's like, no, like listen to your own voice throughout all this. And if it works for you, like stick by it. Don't necessarily worry about what all these other people are thinking and saying, and just like listening to your own voice, I think is super important in general.
Okay. Yeah, and then I'm also gonna plug your YouTube channel.
Yes, which I really don't know why. Like, I was like, I forgot. Yes, I am on YouTube. I am on YouTube, and it's just generally I make a lot of videos on like being confident, dealing with failure, just knowing what to expect in grad school in general. So if you're
Yeah.
looking more for like advice in terms of grad school, I would definitely go to my YouTube channel.
Thank you to everyone who is listening and who's made it this far in this podcast. I want to let you know that the links to everything we talked about today are available below. And if you want updates on the podcast and advice through graduate school, you can sign up for those updates and get my graduate school guide bundle that has a bunch of different cool guides in it. And that will be available at sciencegradschoolcoach.com/STEMS podcast, which is also going to be in the links below this video. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode.